Well, in medicine, there is a principle called first do no harm. You can actually sue a doctor for doing harm. Maybe we should be able to sue mullahs too for doing harm.
Irshad Manji walks into the Oxford Union alone. Across from her sits Mehdi Hasan, one of the sharpest interrogators in television. Behind him, a room full of people waiting for her to slip. She says the thing nobody in that room once said out loud, that the trouble with Islam today is Muslims themselves. Hasan spends 45 minutes trying to make that one sentence collapse. Watch how many times he changes the subject instead. Let's get into it.
What is the trouble with Islam today in your view?
In a word, Muslims. We are the trouble with Islam today. We have allowed tribal culture to colonize the faith of Islam. But the good news in saying this is that we are also the source of reform, meaning that we can literally draw inspiration from our own scripture, from the Quran, in order to reform our hearts, our spirits, and our beings. And one passage that has been profoundly inspirational for me is the one that states, believers, conduct yourselves with justice and bear true witness before God, and here is the revolutionary part, even if it be against yourselves, your parents, or your relatives. This is a call for moral courage. This is a call to stand up when others want you to sit down. And it is part of what makes Islam as a faith revolutionary in the 21st century, not just in the 7th.
It's fascinating to hear you say this, because a lot of your critics, and you have a fair few critics, especially within the Muslim community, their objection to you over the years, my understanding is, that you say there's a problem with Islam, and a lot of Muslims say, and I would count myself amongst them, who say there's a problem with Muslims, certainly with many Muslims, definitely need some form of reform, change, revolution, whatever you want to call it. But Islam is the religion. Don't bring Islam into it. Where do you stand on this?
It is a problem with Muslims. However, Mehdi, let's ask ourselves, what is Islam? Islam isn't some theory. Islam is a way of life, and it is we Muslims who define what that way of life is. And so if we are stopping one another from expressing our diversity, then the message we are sending to each other, not just to the rest of the world, to one another, is that this is Islam. I don't buy that. Tribal culture is not Islam, but we have made ourselves the problem with Islam.
7 seconds in, she has already answered it. In a word, Muslims. Then she quotes the Quran on standing up against your own family. Hasan's reply is not an argument, it's a boundary. Don't bring Islam into it. He wants the religion sealed off from the people who practice it. She refuses the deal in one line. Islam is not a theory, it is a way of life that Muslims define every generation.
Islam today.
We'll come to tribal culture, but I would question the premise which says Islam is defined by what Muslims do, because if that's the basis, then what is the point of a holy book? What is the point of a holy prophet? What is the point of scripture, revelation?
To guide.
But they're not the defining features of a religion.
It's
the tenets
the behavior.
of the faith,
it's the behavior of Muslims that defines in every generation what Islam is.
So
I understand that there's
on that
actually
basis,
a story.
Christianity is defined by Christians.
Of course.
So I can condemn Christianity for something, say, George W. Bush has done.
You can condemn the way Christianity is being practiced, and if a Christian is practicing Christianity in the name of Christ, in a way that is violent, in a way that is intolerant, I don't believe that there is anything blasphemous about saying that there is trouble within Christianity today.
It's almost a chicken and egg argument. What came first, the Islam or the Muslims?
Let me ask you this, Mehdi. Sure, and I understand, where so much of the criticism of just this phrase, the trouble with Islam today, is coming from, but so many people who hadn't read the book and still haven't said, oh, you're blackballing Islam with a wide brush, and I said to them, have you read the book? Because most of the book is about ijtihad. It's about, thinking creatively and independently. And this is a tradition within Islam itself. So in fact, there is nothing wrong with Islam that cannot be corrected by what is right with Islam.
Just to be clear,
Hasan tries a trap here. If Islam is what Muslims do, then Christianity is George W. Bush. She takes the hypothetical without blinking. Condemn how Christianity is practiced when it turns violent. The trap closes on him instead, so he retreats to a chicken and egg riddle. That is what a losing question sounds like. Her answer ends the round. Nothing is wrong with Islam that cannot be corrected by what is right with Islam.
We hear this phrase bandied about in the West a great deal about moderate Muslims. You're not a fan of moderate Muslims. You think moderate Muslims, quote, are part of the problem, not the solution.
Correct. Basically, I make the case for being a reformist Muslim, not just a moderate one. And here's why. Moderate Muslims do denounce violence that is committed in the name of Islam, very much so, but they deny that religion plays any role in that violence. The very first thing you will hear from the mouth of a moderate, typically after an act of violence committed in the name of Islam, is, please don't misunderstand, Islam has nothing to do with this. But that's not true, because those who are committing the violence cite Islam as their inspiration. What reformist Muslims do,
let me finish. To define the religion.
What reformist Muslims do is that we acknowledge there is violence, but we also say that the way in which some people are using our religion is that they are inspired by religion to commit that violence. In other words, when moderate Muslims say that Islam has nothing to do with this, they are the ones, in my humble view, who are ceding the ground, who are handing over the ground of theological interpretation to those who already have malignant intentions. But we have to acknowledge that there are verses that terrorists are using and that they should not have the last word. You can't do that if you're going to say Islam has nothing to do with this.
This is the distinction that makes the whole night make sense. Moderates condemn the violence, then insist religion had nothing to do with it. Reformists say the killers cite scripture, so that scripture has to be taken back from them. Hasan has no counter to that. He repeats that scholars already condemned terrorism. Watch him answer theology with a press release.
Plays into stereotypes. What plays into stereotypes is the relative silence and defensiveness of Muslims who say, Irshad, you're empowering Islamophobes. When Muslims become defensive about this, what the message that they're sending to actual Islamophobes is, we have something to hide. Because now we're just getting angry and emotional over an argument like hers, rather than calmly debating it.
If I say to you calmly that the Quran condemns violence against civilians, the Quran does not justify Al-Qaeda attacks on the Twin Towers, is that defensive? Is that passive?
No,
is that silent?
No, of course not. But the point is that it is progress.
There were Muslim scholars in Britain coming out in 2001 saying this is against the Quran condemns these things.
But these are the same kinds of people who have said things like Islam and the Quran in particular is just unequivocal, that if you kill a human being, it is like killing all of mankind. Not true. Actually, the verse itself, chapter 5, verse 32 reads, if you kill a human being, it is like killing all of mankind, unless you are killing that human being as punishment for violence or murder or other villainy in the land. Okay? So I'm saying that moderate Muslims cannot simply sanitize what does exist in the Quran. We need to get real, we need to get honest, and we need to offer bold and competing reinterpretations of what is actually in the Quran, rather than putting periods and other punctuation marks that don't exist.
Here is the moment the room goes quiet. Hasan hands her the famous line, "Kill one person, it is like killing all mankind." She finishes the verse for him. Chapter 5, verse 32, including the exception clause he left off. That is not a debating trick. That is the text. She calls it hiding behind punctuation.
Okay, well, let me bring in Sheikh Ibrahim Mogre, as Assistant Secretary General of the Muslim Council of Britain. He's an imam at several mosques in Leicester. You heard the verse she cited. Is the Quran... Are Muslims behaving defensively about such verses? Are they hiding behind punctuation in your view?
Well, I feel that Irshad's also being very selective and putting the punctuation marks where they're not necessary. The verse of the Quran certainly talks about the sanctity of human life and the need for the preservation of human life and how wrong it is to take human lives. And when you extend your argument to say that it talks about except in response to violence or murder, but it is not for lay Muslims, people on the street, to take the law into their own hands. And when you say that we have not engaged with you for 10 years, I'd rather that you would have approached the scholars instead of sitting down to write a book and say, guys, this is what we want to talk about.
Sir, with all due respect, you guys, as you put it, have not actually engaged with people like me. In fact, I've received a number of invitations from ordinary Muslims who are part of congregations all over the world, who are excited excited about these arguments, but in every single case, no exaggeration, in every single case, they have written back to me to say, actually, I'm sorry, Irshad, the board has decided that they're not ready, and the congregation is not ready to hear these arguments.
Sheikh Ibrahim Mogra's answer is simple. She should have come to the scholars instead of writing a book. She has the receipts. Invitations from ordinary congregations all over the world. Every single one killed by the mosque board. The institution that says, "Come talk to us," is the same one that locks the door. Hasan moves straight on, rather than sit in that.
Experts, you're doing DIY Islam.
No, spirituality
Please don't
cannot
misunderstand me.
I do very much understand, and I've heard it over and over and over again. And I remember in Indonesia when this point was made to me, and a scholar, certified scholar, sitting right next to me, said to the person making your point, sir, he said, if you're going to go as far as to compare spirituality to medicine or accounting, well, in medicine there is a principle called first do no harm. You can actually sue a doctor for doing harm. Maybe we should be able to sue mullahs too for doing harm.
Why are you against expertise specialism?
The Quran, you know, it's interesting because the reason I can embrace the Quran is that, 3 times as many verses in the Quran call on Muslims to think and rethink and analyze, as you've pointed out, rather than submit blindly. So by that criterion, actually all of God's creatures, Muslims especially, are called upon to keep thinking. It's not about expertise. It's about remembering, sir, that you are not God and I am not God. And therefore, none of us can claim to have the, quote, right interpretation.
Would you get rid of all scholars, imams, mullahs as you call them, anyone, get rid of all of it?
I would help equip a new generation of Muslims with the self-confidence to recognize that they are allowed to think for themselves.
Hasan's framing is that religion is a specialist trade. You do not do your own surgery, so do not do your own Islam. She turns the analogy inside out. In medicine, you can sue a doctor for harm. Maybe we should be able to sue the mullahs too. The room hears it, and he changes tack. Would you get rid of all the scholars? That is a man looking for a cleaner fight.
My worry is, if I'm in Al-Qaeda, that's very appealing. I don't need to worry about classical law, scholarship. I just make up my own religion. I give a fatwa saying, kill the Jews.
And they do. And they do. That's exactly what they are doing.
And aren't you validating them? Because you're saying from a liberal perspective, we make it up as we go along. And they, from an extremist perspective, say, let's make it up as we go along. You're almost empowering the very people you claim to be fighting with.
That's a very... I think that's an excellent point. I've heard it before, and I've said it before. That's an excellent point. Good in theory, wonderful in theory. But again, I live in the world of reality. And the reality is that people like this already exist. And this is why progressive thinkers, and I wish there were more people in positions of religious authority who would take that power and actually democratize the ijtihad, so that young people know that they are worthy of thinking about these issues for themselves, yes, in a non-violent way, but actually developing that personal relationship with Allah rather than believing that they are here to worship Allah's self-appointed ambassador.
This is Hasan's biggest swing of the night. If everyone thinks for themselves, Al-Qaeda gets to invent its own religion too. Listen to her answer. They already do it. The fatwas are already written and already obeyed. Scholarly consensus stopped none of them. Good in theory, he is told. She lives in the world of reality.
One thing I noticed when I was reading the book, you say, well, there are plenty of women, you would agree, in the world, in the Muslim world, who wear the headscarf, who wear hijab, and they are fighting the battles you would want them to fight against domestic violence, against rape, against female circumcision, and the rest. How do you think they feel when you refer to having worn a hijab as wearing a condom over my head, or calling it a faux symbol of modesty, a symbol of Arab tribal culture? They're not really going to get on board your reform project, are they, when you refer to them as that way?
Well, no, actually, that's not true. Because again, you are assuming that the only people who care about this subject are people who would be offended by notions like this. Quite the opposite. I can't begin to tell you how many women who do choose to wear the hijab have said, thank you for making this point, and I want you to know, in many cases they say, that I choose to do this for myself, but I have struggled with it. Just as you are calling on me to now defend the rights of women on whom hijab is opposed, you're calling on me as someone who has the luxury to choose it, you're calling on me to fight for the rights of other women who don't want to choose it. And that's exactly the point. You are perfectly free to choose, but the point is choose.
Hasan reaches for the quote he thinks finishes her. She called wearing a hijab a condom over her head. How will hijab-wearing women get on board with that? Her answer reframes the whole thing in seconds. Women who choose it thank her for the point. Others were never given the choice at all. You are perfectly free to choose. The point is choose. He never touches that sentence again.
Part of your role is speaking truth to power. When you say I speak truth to power, I also worry that there are people in power, not in the Muslim world, in London, in Washington DC, Toronto, Tel Aviv, who you're not speaking truth to. You're telling them what they want to hear. They want to hear that this is a problem with Islam, it's not a problem with our policies, and Irshad Manji is saying, I agree with you.
Nope. I have not let anybody off the hook. I am, in fact, distinguishing between politics, culture, and religion.
You talk about the Armenian genocide in 1915, carried out by the Turks. The Turks deny it was a genocide. Armenian genocide, recognized by many countries. You refer to it as a Muslim crime. Why is it not a Turkish crime? Why does everything get boiled down? It's almost, again, that you're playing, unwittingly perhaps, the extremist game, because you're defining everything through an Islamic prism.
When something is done in the name of a particular religion or a particular God, that is when I think we can legitimately apply the name of the religion to that crime. The moment people, sincerely believe that the Quran has nothing to do with this violence is the moment when terrorists who commit these crimes in the name of Allah will no longer be able to get away with them.
Now comes the accusation of the night. She only speaks truth to Muslim power, never to Washington or Tel Aviv. Then he raises the Armenian genocide, and he wants it called a Turkish crime, not a Muslim one. Watch what she does with it. When a crime is committed in the name of God, the name sticks. Deny the theology, and the killers walk away clean. He wanted a gotcha, and got a thesis.
The refusenic line, the kind of outsider, the critical thinker, do you think that mantle came to you partly because you're a gay Muslim in a faith where gay Muslims have their human rights abused in a lot of Muslim majority societies?
Maybe, but the reality is that I didn't know this about myself when I was a kid.
Yeah.
Never even thought about it. So I personally don't think that if I was, if I was straight, I would like to believe that I would be arguing exactly what I'm arguing now. But only Allah knows.
I read through your book and I see that time and again, you and I would argue, both hate the violent extremists in our religion. We hate the people who were treating Dr. Haladiab badly. We both agree on that. We don't like what they do. We don't know what they stand for. But there seems to be a moment where there's a lot of name calling in your books. Islamo-tribalists, freedom haters, fundamentalists, Islam supremacists.
That's very interesting because...
How would you define an Islam supremacist?
Islam supremacist is anybody who believes that Islam is the only truth available to humankind. And from my point of view, that is actually un-Quranic. Because again, the Quran calls on us to be humble in our interpretations. Now, in calling the behavior of an Islam supremacist un-Quranic, am I name calling? Am I being divisive? Am I being dismissive?
You are being a little bit divisive.
I'm being descriptive. And you have to stand for something, Mehdi. I stand for human rights. And that means that I have to call...
A lot of the people you call Islam supremacists would say they stand for human rights as well.
Violations of human rights.
They would say that they stand for human rights as well. They just happen to believe that Islam is the truth. As a Christian believes Christianity is the truth. And a Jew believes Judaism is the truth. But there are plenty of Christians and plenty of Jews and plenty of other people, including atheists, who do not believe that their truth, their particular truth, is the one and only truth that is available to humankind. Anybody who believes that is a supremacist, a dogmatist of some kind, and I make no apologies for saying so.
Hasan suggests her whole outlook comes from being a gay Muslim. She will not take the bait. If she was straight, she would argue exactly the same, and only Allah knows. Then he calls her book name calling. Islamo-tribalists, Islam supremacists, so she defines the term on the spot. An Islam supremacist believes their truth is the only truth for humankind. Plenty of Christians, Jews, and atheists make no such claim. He calls it divisive, she calls it descriptive.
Does it bother you that some of the West's best-known Islamophobes are such ardent cheerleaders of yours?
It's interesting, you know, the very fact that I proudly and happily and joyously hang on to my faith irks a lot of people who would otherwise want to support. I've lost many fans by writing a book called Allah, Liberty and Love, because many people thought after the first book that merely by critiquing religion, merely by doing that, I was going in the direction of atheism. The exact opposite has happened. I've deepened my faith with God and have therefore incurred the wrath of many people who would rather that I ditch Islam. And I haven't, and I won't.
And you have been criticized for sharing platforms and going to events with, members of the so-called counter-jihad movement, the kind of American far-right, Sharia law obsessives.
But I've also shared platforms with people on the far left and people in between. The point is, honest conversation is important and needed everywhere. And rather, I would have a faithful Muslim speaking truth to that power, to right-wing power, when I'm facing them, than to just leave that space empty and cede that territory to these folks altogether. Won't do that.
Hasan's line is that Islamophobes love her, so something must be wrong with her. That is guilt by audience, not an argument. She lost fans by writing a book about loving God. She has shared platforms with the far left too, and in a right-wing room, she would rather a faithful Muslim be standing in it. Better than leaving the space empty. Try answering that.
Lady here in the third row.
You've spoken a lot about clarity, about being sincere. You've been trying to contextualize your books, and I have read your first book, I haven't read your second. And in actual fact, I don't feel any sincerity. I don't feel you've been clear. I don't feel any humbleness or humility in anything that you've stated in your books particularly. I feel some this evening in your attempt to clarify what you said. Because you interchange Islam and Muslim consistently. You've tried to clarify that this evening. You haven't really, because I work with Muslims. I work with Safra Project. We work with Muslim, lesbian, bisexual and trans women. A lot of the work you've been doing actually contradicts our work, has actually detrimentally affected our work.
How? How so?
Because you haven't clarified, you've generalized. You said, oh, let's add a context. You add a context in this debate, but in your books, the books that millions of people read, does not contextualize, it generalizes and it essentializes. When you say more people need to speak up, we don't get the platform. The reason you get a platform is because what you say continues to support the racialization of Muslims.
Irshad, you want to come back?
Simply to say that I'm sorry you feel that way. I do find it interesting that when people accuse me of essentializing, they too presume to be speaking on behalf of all of these Muslims who are very angry about my so-called essentializing. But again, there are plenty of other Muslims who would disagree with you, and so I don't hold it against you or hold it against them. This is the discussion we need to be having. I'm sorry, as I say, that you feel the way that you do, and good luck in your work, because we all have something to contribute.
That is the hardest hit of the night, and it comes from the floor, not from Hasan. No sincerity, no humility, and a charge of racializing Muslims. Look at the response. No sneer, no counterattack. Sorry you feel that way, and good luck in your work. Then the point that lands. Her critics also presume to speak for every angry Muslim. This is the debate we should be having.
One thing we didn't get to talk about, time permitting, is, for example, you hold views that most Muslims don't hold, the vast majority. For example, you believe the Quran is an imperfect book, a flawed book, a contradictory book. Very hard for you to round up Muslims to speak out on that issue because they just don't agree with you.
Sure. Of course there are lots of Muslims who don't agree with me, and Mehdi, there are lots who do, even on this point. But surely you would acknowledge
that there's a big contingent of Muslims who agree with you on the field.
Surely you would acknowledge that it is far less frightening to speak up in support of the perfect Quran than it is to speak up about contradictions within the Quran.
That wasn't my point. My point was that
but that is the point. That is the point.
My point is on violence. Lots of Muslims agree with you. On the Quran, most don't. Therefore, it's very hard for them to come and share a platform with you when they...
How can you say that most don't when we don't have a world in which it is safe for people to speak up? about their real view of the Quran, Muslims included, or Muslims especially. How can you say that most don't?
Hasan's last big move is a head count. Most Muslims disagree with you about the Quran, so you cannot build anything. How would you know what most Muslims think when it is not safe to say it out loud? That is her entire book, handed back to him in one question. He does not answer it. He goes to the audience instead.
The central tenet of Islam is belief in one universal God. The central sin in Islam, therefore, in my view, is playing God with one another. And beyond that, this is your relationship with your Creator. Do not impose on other people. Do not intimidate other people. Understand that you will have the conversation you need to have on the Day of Judgment with your Creator. And why does it need to be more complicated than that? If you keep it that simple, then I think that part of the contribution one would be making is liberating spirituality from the cage of organized religion.
45 minutes, one chair, and a room built for opposition. Irshad Manji never got a friendly question all night. Her own sentences were read back at her. Her childhood was used as evidence. Her audience was turned against her. The argument she walked in with walked out intact. Muslims define what Islam looks like, so Muslims are the ones who can change it. Mehdi Hasan had the chair, the clock, and the crowd. He still never landed the blow that ended it. Do you think Manji exposed something real? Or was Hasan right to push back on how she says it? Drop your thoughts in the comments.